In my old life, when I used to teach economics and business and management, I used to take my students to see factories. A lot of the times it was to car factories like Ford's plant at Dagenham and the Rover plant in Oxford that now produces the BMW Mini. And one thing that always struck out to me was I'd always ask the people that worked there about the total number of people who worked in the factory and how it had changed over time. And I remember certainly at places like Dagenham, it was like something like 15,000 used to work there back in the 70s, and it was now like less than 1,000. And despite that, they were actually producing more cars today than they did back then with all of those people. And that was obviously down to automation. Technological advances in the production of cars. The other thing that I remember was when I was 18 as a student, I remember going into the bank. This was like before cash machines, and writing out checks. And you'd see this army of bank clerks behind the counter. And then within about a decade, all of those people have been displaced again by technology. So what I'm getting at here is that technological advances have already seen an awful lot of people, both in the manufacturing and service sectors, lose their jobs. So that then presented society with a problem of like, what we're going to do with all of these people. We're actually producing more stuff with fewer people. One option that I remember being told about in the 70s, early 70s when I was at primary school, was we were all going to be working 3-day weeks and have loads and loads of leisure time. You know, we could divide the work that was needed amongst more people, so each person worked fewer hours. But obviously that didn't happen. One thing that did happen though was a massive expansion in higher education. So that took millions of young people out of the workforce for 3-4 years whilst they were going to uni. So that was one thing that the government did do to solve the problem. Another thing that they did was allow people to retire early, or actually more accurately take sickness benefit. So that was a way of soaking up people who were really unemployed, but without it affecting the official unemployment figures. You know, people were categorised as being off on long-term sick, and they were happy to go with that because the benefits were pretty good compared to conventional job seekers allowance. But I think the most effective thing that was done to soak up this surplus labour was the creation of what David Graeber, a bloke who used to be a lecturer at the LSE, quite a famous author, appeared on the Kaiser Report a few times, wrote various books. His best known piece of work was called Bullshit Jobs. And basically, bullshit jobs were created to soak up all the people that used to work in factories and offices that weren't needed anymore because of automation. So how would we define a bullshit job? I would say a bullshit job is one where maybe the customer is the government, maybe you're producing regulatory compliance. So in other words, there's no genuine customer who's choosing of their own free will to buy whatever it is that you're making in your bullshit job. So, like a great example, I used to like this person as well, but this person was called Tara. She used to work at the school that I worked at, and she was quite a clever lady, quite an interesting lady, but basically her job involved collecting data from us teachers and then putting it onto databases and doing various kind of stuff to do with academic reports. A lot of the time those reports, even when they were sort of sent to parents, they weren't even read properly. It was just an exercise in bureaucracy. That's a classic example of a bullshit job. This person, often as well, they were involved in producing regulatory compliance, bits of paper and information that got sent off to the government to prove that the school was doing whatever the government wanted it to do. And the tragedy of all of this was that it wasn't necessary, and in fact, as a result of Tara's work, the school actually produced less output, it actually produced less education, because rather than teachers planning and preparing lessons, marking their students' work, a lot of their time was taken up with Tara's demands for paperwork, and that time could have been spent doing other more useful things like teaching and learning. So that would be an example of a bullshit job. Another example would be the kind of not allowed phenomena that you're actually seeing more and more of in Britain, whereby people are hired to put on high-vis jackets, just sit down here, and tell people that they're not allowed to take photographs of buildings and stuff, So these people, again, are they producing things of value that free individuals are choosing to buy of their own accord, voluntarily? No, they're not. So that would be, another example of a bullshit job where people are producing nothing of value at all. And if they were to stop working, would people notice? Yeah, they probably would. But the tragedy is, they would probably notice that their life has improved as a result of these people employed in bullshit jobs doing less of their bullshit work. Other phenomenons, it's all over the place, isn't it? Layers and layers of middle management, and carrying out risk assessments, conducting meetings, all of this kind of bureaucratic nonsense that's crept into Britain that we didn't have, when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s. This is what Graeber called bullshit jobs. Another example would be the NHS. The NHS used to work better when it was run by frontline staff, your nurses and matrons and all of that jazz. Today we've actually got a whole army of NHS bureaucrats engaged in bullshit jobs, and as a result of that, it's a lot less efficient and it's a lot more expensive in terms of the cost per treatment delivered to patients. But why do these bullshit jobs exist? Well, it was like society's way of finding work for these people that had been displaced by technology. And there's that phrase, isn't it? The devil makes work for idle hands. And I think the government probably was concerned that if these bullshit jobs weren't created by passing all sorts of onerous regulatory requirements, then people might notice that they were being screwed over by society, by the establishment, for want of a better. So why am I going on about this? Well, it kind of stems from the last video that I did on furlough, and people, there was a couple of people in the comments who quite rightly said that they had no choice about being furloughed, and my response to that would be, yeah, that was true. And two further things to add is, first of all, I think for many people, being furloughed was sort of like a very cruel form of psychological warfare, in that, it confirmed to them that they were doing bullshit work, that they could actually stop working and the wheels of the world continued to turn. They weren't, to coin a phrase, an essential worker. They were non-essential. And I can imagine that would have been pretty demoralising for people. Imagine, you haul yourself out of your pit on Monday morning to go and work. And, you think you work very hard. And I know Tara used to work very, very hard. Used to get very stressed by what she was doing, asked to do. But as again, the tragedy is, would anyone notice if she actually stopped producing her output? And the sad answer was no. In fact, things probably would have worked better. So as I say, like the whole thing about furlough, I think, was that it was mostly people in bullshit jobs who got furloughed. They weren't the essential ones. Obviously, there's a few kind of exceptions to that. So again, there's somebody who writes on my YouTube comments who used to be work for an airline, you know, doing the cabin crew. Now, obviously, you know, you need cabin crew to operate a passenger aircraft. So, you know, that, and they do important stuff, you know, like making sure that idiots aren't doing stupid things inside an aeroplane, and you know, they do nice things for you, like bring you a cold beer and stuff. But you know, they were furloughed because the technocrats decided that us plebs weren't going to be travelling by plane for a while. So I wouldn't say being a cabin crew was a bullshit job, but I think many of the people, many but not all of the people that were furloughed, they were engaged in bullshit work, and that allowed them to be furloughed and for society to still function. You know, because if you think about it logically, if you're doing an important job and you don't do it, well, then important stuff isn't getting done, and society shouldn't be able to function, you know, if you're not producing the things that you're producing because you're doing something essential. So yeah, I'm rambling a little bit here, but what I'm trying to desperately get at is that I think furlough was a psychological operation, and it revealed to the people doing the bullshit jobs that their life was kind of that their life's work was bullshit. Didn't really matter when push came to shove. We could do without you. You're non-essential. And that was done, I think, as a psychological operation. The only thing that I would say about this is if you were doing a bullshit job, then I think most people with half a brain cell could actually see that what you were doing was of no use whatsoever. Or, you know, maybe smarter people could realise that what they were doing actually had a negative value added, that their work was actually detracting from society's welfare, total utility, happiness, whatever you want to say. And the correct response in that situation would have been to quit the bullshit job and do something useful with your life. Yeah, I've been talking to my son sort of recently about what he wants to do, and you know, credit to him, he said this to me without any prompting whatsoever, is that he wants to do something useful with his life. He's not particularly interested in earning mega bucks or massive status or anything like that, but what he does want is to do something useful, so, which I think is laudable. Going back to the furlough for a minute, yeah, I understand that people didn't choose to be furloughed. They ended up being furloughed. There was at least one person on the comments who said that when this happened to them, they couldn't accept it, and they resigned when they were furloughed, and they went and got another job. There was other people who were kind of less moral, and they took the dirty furlough money and then got another job doing something else that hadn't been shut down by the lockdowns. So quite interesting, really. I think another interesting thing to float into the mix about furlough is, you know, whatever happened, you know, I know that people that were furloughed didn't choose to be furloughed, but they still experienced a very long period of leisure time that was being funded, you know, by the printing press, ultimately by other people who were going to be paying the price via a combination of higher taxes and inflation. So, you know, those it is still fair to say that that the winners, there were winners and losers from furlough, and would it be fair to, in whatever form it takes, would it be fair for the burden of kind of putting what was right, would it be right for that burden to fall on everybody, or should the burden fall slightly higher on those that were furloughed, that did get that extra leisure time? I don't know, it's a complicated one. I think the other thing that I would say, just, you know, final thoughts, is, you know, it's just the importance of doing something useful with your life, you know, like doing a type of work that's like truly beneficial, rather than doing a bullshit job, you know, even if the pay is good and if the status is high. So yeah, that's all I want to say today. So God bless to you.